Greetings and welcome to Ghost Stories of Washington, Chapter 5, The Road Well Traveled, Part 4, Presence in the Park. The Roaring Twenties were a wild time in Washington and everywhere else in North America. The Great War had finally ended, leaving in its wake not only a booming economy, but an entire generation of citizens ready to appreciate the economic upsurge and enjoy life more fully than ever before. And no two people were better prepared to take advantage of the newly created atmosphere of freedom than Tom and Eliza. They were young, they were ambitious, and they were engaged to be married. They were certain that their prosperity and happiness were assured. But to help fate along just a little bit, the couple moved to the big city from the small town in which they had been raised. Seattle in the 1920s was an exciting place to be. During the day, Tom worked at an insurance agency. He was intelligent, and perhaps more importantly, he was industrious. Although he was hired only to do clerical work, he welcomed every opportunity to show that he could do more. Before long, Tom's hard work was rewarded. He was made a junior partner in the firm. On the afternoon of his promotion, Tom could hardly wait to see his beloved Eliza and share the terrific news. She could finally quit her job as a typist, and the two could marry and start the family they both wanted. The clock above Tom's desk seemed to take at least twice as long as usual to get to 5 p.m. At quitting time, he all but flew from the office. The firm's senior partners were used to their young apprentice staying behind until all his work was finished. They were not upset, though. Quite the contrary. They were delighted because they knew that he was rushing off to plan the rest of his life. A life that would include extraordinary loyalty to their firm. By the time he arrived outside the building where Eliza worked, Tom was out of breath. He was also early. She would not be free to leave work for another few minutes. He took the time to compose himself, catch his breath, and enjoy the anticipation of the moment. That enjoyment became so all-encompassing that when Eliza did make her way to his side, he was completely lost in thought. For her part, Eliza was so pleased to see her fiancé that she did not notice the faraway look in his eyes. She certainly didn't expect that her simple, enthusiastic greeting of hello would startle Tom, but it succeeded in doing exactly that. His jumpy response told Eliza that her normally relaxed lover was bursting with excitement. She could hardly wait to hear his news. Arm in arm, the couple strolled through the darkening Seattle streets, planning the most wonderful future possible. And children, Tom, we must have children, Eliza declared as they climbed the Queen Anne Hill. We'll have the finest children in the world, Tom confirmed without hesitation. Neither direction nor distance had meant anything to the couple as they'd walked and talked, but now, as they found themselves approaching Kinnear Park, they made their way toward a bench. The chatter between the two continued, but as Tom was extolling the sterling qualities that their future children would possess, Eliza slowly became more distracted. She thought she could hear the sounds of a baby crying somewhere very close at hand. It's just my imagination, she thought. It's because we're talking about babies. That's why I'm hearing those cries. Finally, the piteous wails completely diverted Eliza's concentration, and she interrupted Tom to ask if he heard them too. The still excited man stopped talking mid-sentence and turned his head at an angle. Yes, you're right. There is a baby crying nearby, he confirmed. The pair immediately stood up and began to move toward the plaintive sounds. But no matter how far they walked, they always seemed to be the same distance away from the disturbing noise. The sun had now been set for quite some time, and the growing darkness led the couple to assume that they were merely having trouble seeing the child among the shadows. Their own joy set aside temporarily, Tom and Eliza concentrated on the source of the cries. They could certainly not leave while the infant lay abandoned at the park. Their search had thus far been fruitless and frustrating, when Tom and Eliza happened upon a policeman strolling through the park. They were relieved at the prospect of having someone in authority to help them in their mission. The couple hurried toward the uniformed officer. In their mounting concern for the unseen baby's well-being, the two spoke simultaneously, and in far too much of a mad rush to be understood. Even so, the policeman was calm. He knew exactly what it was that this young couple was so upset about. They were merely the latest in a long line of people to hear phantom cries of a deceased child. Cries that were so poignant and real that he knew it would take quite a lot of convincing to call off the search party, and these two were probably already envisioning. Fortunately, he had done this before. With as much patience as he could muster, the kindly Seattle policeman explained that no matter how diligent the search, no one could ever locate the particular crying baby. It's a ghost, he stated simply. Those cries you heard were from another dimension. That child is no longer in this time or place. Only his cries are left with us. Even though it was twilight, the officer could tell by the expressions on their faces that the young people and couple was shocked by his words. He also knew that this was not the last time he would have to make this same explanation to concerned citizens. People had been hearing the little soul's cries for years, and they probably would for many more years to come. When they were convinced that the policeman knew what he was talking about, Tom and Eliza left the park and headed to a downtown restaurant for a late dinner. The excited chatter that had marked their trip to the park had been replaced by stony silence. Although they felt they had little choice but to accept the policeman's words as truth, neither of them could quite believe what they'd just heard. Neither the pitiful wailing nor the officer's chilling explanation for it. Months, even years later, long after they'd married and started their family, Tom and Eliza would often discuss that memorable evening in Kinnear Park, wondering about the tiny infant responsible for the mournful crying that they and so many others had heard. And the autumn of 1929 did not bring much that was positive to the world. It did, however, mark the end of something negative. After that time, the phantom cries of the ghostly infant at the top of Queen Anne Hill in Kinnear Park were no longer heard. The child had gone on to his or her eternal rest at last. Thanks to one couple's compassion, their tiny tormented soul nor its plight were ever forgotten. As soon as their own children were old enough to hear the story, Tom and Eliza told and retold the tale of their experience to their two sons. When those two boys grew into men, married, and had children of their own, They shared the true ghost story with those kids. Because of this family's intergenerational storytelling, the suffering child has been given the attention that he cried out for, even after death. Hopefully you enjoyed this Ghost Stories of Washington, Chapter 5, The Road Well Traveled, Part 4, Presence in the Park. And I look forward to seeing you in our next episode, which will be the start of Chapter 6. This one involves sea lore, right up my alley, being a retired Navy individual. So I look forward to this next chapter in Ghost Stories of Washington. We'll see you in the next episode. Bye for now, and take care.